And welcome. You're listening to Heart of Mind, a radio for the new millennium. I'm Kathryn Davis, and today I will be speaking with a very special individual indeed, Mark Nepo. And we're going to be speaking about the stories and lessons of community to find the resilience we need to live in everyday life in a very complicated society. Mark Nepo is the author of More Together Than Alone, Discovering the Power and Spirit of Community in Our Lives and in the World. And Mark is a poet, storyteller, and internationally renowned spiritual teacher, is the author of 14 audio projects and 19 books. And we're going to be talking about some of this work. First, I wanted to welcome you, Mark, to Heart of Mind.
Oh, thank you. It's so great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. And, you know, this subject that you work through is very, very dear to my heart as well. I work in from the perspective of spirituality, but really looking at it more as a community service and engagement in life rather than sort of isolating oneself and gazing at their navel. And I think that it's important to bring oneself into the world and engage there. So perhaps you can start by telling us a little about yourself and how you came to this work through your poetry, storytelling, and spiritual teachings.
Sure, yes. Well, you know, I started the book about 13, 14 years ago, and I was really just compelled to see if I could learn and gather stories of when we've worked well together and just really uplift the lessons of that and to affirm this lineage of care and interdependence that is much quieter than the lineage of fear and isolation, but it's just as strong and just as long-lasting. And I think before that, you know, as I'm a long-term cancer survivor 30 years ago, and I think before all of this, I think that was my first being thrown deeply into raw community. When I would be in these waiting rooms and treatment rooms and recovery rooms and, support groups, and all of a sudden, there we are, all the things I was taught about needing to do in order to get to know someone, and they were all out the window. We were just, sitting with a stranger and saying, "Hi, how are you?" And "I'm not good. I'm afraid. How are you?" And all of a sudden, we were intimates on this raft of surviving together.
Well, that's pretty poignant, I have to say, and I can understand that for sure. And so as you moved into this intimacy of sorts with the people who were going through the same experience, what is that telling you now about all of our experiences and what's really needed there in terms of our relationships?
Well, I think through my own experience and through all the things that I've been able to learn through these different cultures and times, There are always patterns in history when we have come toward each other and times when we've pushed each other away. And so much comes to whether the old and very still true choice between fear and love. And I think, I've learned through this that there are four at least, but let's focus on four timeless resources that are medicines, if you will, that help us remember that we are more together than alone and that we need each other. And those four are holding, listening, the life of questions, and story. From the beginning of time, those things have brought us together when we've drifted apart or when fear has made us think we are different. They've reminded us that we are at heart the same. And I think that we suffer now globally from a lack of listening and holding, and from a lack of realizing that no one person has the answer or no one group. One of the traditions that I lift up in the Native American tradition, elder councils have always met in circle, and they still do. And they don't just do that out of equity because there's no head to a circle. They do that so that everyone has a direct view of the center. And I love that because the assumption, the ground of that is that no one view is enough. We need everybody's view in order to even approach the resources of life and the things that we rely on.
Well, that's really very beautiful, I have to say, and I hadn't considered that in terms of the circle. And how do you work with people or speak to people about keeping that perspective of the center? Because so often we're not really working through a face-to-face conversation. We're on phones, we're on computers, we're doing things digitally, we are communicating in ways that are very different from the ancient ways. How would you recommend to people that they bring the center back into their focus?
Well, I think that this is one of the challenges of our age, because all the technology, which is wonderful, it's how we're talking today, those are tools. They are inert. They don't have values. But if we are not meeting the outer life with an inner life, which doesn't mean we have to have things figured out, but that we're committed to an authentic journey, then the way water will fill any empty hole because of gravity, the characteristics of technology and everything around us will become our values by default. And so there is no replacement, and all the traditions speak about this differently. There's no replacement for recovering our presence and holding nothing back and listening and regarding each other. So, while we can use technology, it gives us the illusion of connection without the experience of authentic connection. And so what does it mean? It means that, I've got to get out of the house. It means I have to find a respectful way to interact with people that are in my community, that are, even at the cafe. We all are kind of alone together with our computers and our headphones. And it means that we have to break that isolation by asking questions, by saying hello. Mother Teresa said that courage was doing small things with love. These are the quiet braveries that I think over time, in addition to the ways we're asked to respond to specific issues or crises or things that are happening, I believe that how we are in this world makes a difference. And I'll offer you a biological metaphor that, any single body is considered more healthy than ill if it has one more healthy cell. Now, we'd like a lot more, but if we have one more healthy cell than ill, we're considered well. So if we look at humanity as a global body, every soul is such a cell. And every conversation like we're having today, or every time that we are authentically opening ourselves to grow or to be compassionate or to help lift something or someone who has fallen, we might be the one healthy soul that keeps humanity healthy.
I agree. I certainly agree. And since you are a storyteller, and you do work with people through stories and in a creative way, before we get to some of the deeper conversation, can you give us a story of how this can be expressed in a person's life, and how some opening or connection was made through the principles you're speaking of?
Yeah, so here's a little story from, I was in London in July doing some publication events around the new book, and I was on a corner, and with those beautiful double-deck buses were coming and going. I was having coffee, and the bus came, and it waited, and then it left on its schedule, and a woman was rushing with bundles, and she missed the bus. And, we see this all the time. We are sometimes that person. And then the most quiet but beautiful thing happened. She kind of sighed and stood there, and the bus crossed the street, went about 25 feet. All of a sudden, the brakes hissed, the door opened, and that bus driver had seen her in the rearview mirror and waited for her. And of all the things and the people I met while I was in London, that kept staying with me as a quiet teacher. I think that bus driver was a profound teacher, because sooner or later, no matter what our plans are, we're all late. And so much of community and compassion is that, we wait for each other. He saw her, and he acted on it, and he waited, and that was a quiet little moment of community that we could use every day in our lives.
This is very true, and that's probably an extremely rare thing to happen in London. Certainly in New York, I would be quite pleased to see something like that happening, with everyone in such a sort of a mindless rush. And I think sometimes that it isn't that people don't have the compassion, but it seems to me that people are living in a world of stress and rushing about, and not even in a state of awareness about what's going on around them, or even with themselves sometime. So how would you speak to people about sort of allowing this sense of centeredness and being able to wait and be compassionate and to listen, how they can do it with regard to themselves? Because very often we don't even listen to ourselves to know what we're thinking and feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I view this as, and in the work that I do with people too, and for myself, I don't believe personally in an arrived state of enlightenment. I mean, maybe that's possible. Maybe someone like the Dalai Lama is there all the time, but that certainly hasn't been my experience. My experience is that we fall, and I do, in and out of being clear and confused, and being patient and being impatient, and feeling safe and feeling afraid. So that the real spiritual journey of being an individual in a body and time on earth is a practice of return. That's when I fall down, I learn how to get up. When I'm impatient, I learn how to be patient. And so, again, we move back to how do I return to this openness when I'm closed? And so, one thing for me is that I try to move and return to what I call the pace of being real. What do I mean by that? I mean that when my body and my mind and my heart can move at the same pace, I tend to be more present, and I tend to take things in more, and I tend to stop rushing. And all of a sudden, like tumblers in a mystical lock, even though it may not last long, that's when things have that extra glow. when I'm out on a walk and all of a sudden the light is extra special, and what's going on there? Or when I'm listening and I see the beauty in someone who I don't even know because I've slowed down to that pace of what is real. And then, my mind races or I get alarmed and I get afraid and then I fall out of that. And so I think we're constantly being asked to return to being fully present and open-hearted. And when we're like that, we can take more in and we assume our place on that elder circle where we go, oh, this is my view of the center, what's yours? Instead of pushing away everything that is different.
I like that. And I've experienced it, but I hadn't really put it into language to understand it in the way that you're describing it. So that's really very beautiful, because we all have those moments, even if unexpectedly, where we see something exquisite, like maybe a beautiful insect on a leaf blowing in the wind, and that's when life does become poetry, the experience of poetry, and that seems to be what you are describing, and that's actually something that's very pleasant and joyful to allow and to cultivate for one's life, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and it gives us access to, it's interesting that kindness and kinship have the same root word, because kindness is not just, if you are kind to me, I'm so grateful, and it helps extend and deepen our relationship. But the other reward for kindness is that we experience oneness. We experience our kinship with all things gets restored when we're kind. And so that we add that to the mix of when we can be present, and we start to realize, out of all the stories and all the research I did for this book, there was one kind of insight was recurring in all cultures and at the bottom of all stories, and it was that when fear makes us think that self-interest will protect us, love and suffering affirm that we're more together than alone.
Well, that's powerful. I have also a thought about the context of your conversation, because we are speaking of a certain time and place and historical events, happenings in the world. And what I sometimes find the tension is in the exposure to the toxic thinking and the anger and the fear, as you're speaking of, that it's almost like a cloud that can overtake us. So if we're looking at too many video clips, or we're listening to news stories, or we're getting engaged in the debate, pro and con of this or that, and who's going to win, just the exposure, I find, it tends to pull my energy or my emotions into that direction. And I'm wondering if you could advise us how to negotiate this need to be connected to the reality of what's happening, but also the determination not to be overtaken by it.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing you're bringing up. And so first, let me share that I think that one of the reasons that I think that's happening is that, by nature, things are always falling apart and coming together at the same time. However, just because of our exposure, that as you're describing it, we in the modern world, I feel, are addicted to the noise of things falling apart. That's always in the foreground. And so, all we have to do is when I was young and I would turn on the TV, there's an example, the weather report. Well, now it's called Storm Watch. Well, last I knew, storm was only one form of weather. And so that's always in the front and in the foreground. And so I don't feel like we need a good news station. We need a whole, WHOLE, news station that reports alongside everything that's falling apart. We don't want to look away from that, but the things that are coming together, because it's in the wholeness that we have resources. And I think one way, or I experience it, because I get oversaturated, of course, too. And I think it's wonderful that there is exposure, but I don't believe the exposure is intended for one person. I think the exposure is intended to reach as many people throughout the day as possible. So, for instance, when those terrible in 9/11, when the towers came down, I didn't need to see that image of the plane going into the tower. I just needed to see it once with an open heart. I didn't need to see it 100 times. Maybe it needed to be played 100 times so 100 different people could see it. But I didn't need to see it. So what I try to do is I try to take in whether it's difficult or inspiring, to take it in once in a heartfelt way, and then turn away so I can be with that, internalize it, and bring it into my life so I can act on that, not replay it over and over. So this has to do with not being passive when we're hypnotized by the noise of things falling apart. We need, and this ties in with what we were talking earlier, when I can move at the pace of what is real, I have more clarity and strength to turn away from that dark hypnosis. So much comes back to then getting out of the house and talking to somebody about how I was impacted by what I've seen, rather than staying home and watching it over and over and over.
I agree with that, though it can be hard to avoid, but having that consciousness, awareness about what's happening really does help us, I think. Even if we've gotten ourselves drawn into it, at some point we can come to that recognition and pull back out of that hypnosis, as you call it, which I believe is a good description of what it is. I also had another thought with regard to this, in the sense that people also have a tendency to follow down this path of, I call it ego righteousness, in the sense of having to prove themselves right about a thing, no matter what that thing or ideology might be, and just the need to have that, I don't know if it's one-upmanship or the correctness of their perspective, irregardless of what they're talking about, is a way of moving oneself into conflict. And I see that in some ways in opposition to what you talk about, which is sort of this lineage of kindness and this lineage of caring that is also part of the human story. And I'm wondering if you could take a look at those two things.
Sure. Thank you for that thoughtful question. So two things come to mind and heart. And one is, and both are in the book. One is, I quote in there's a developmental psychologist, Robert Keegan at Harvard, who I quote because of the way he defines centrism, egocentrism, what you're talking about, or ethnocentrism, any kind of self-centered position. And he defines that as when we mistake what is familiar as true. When we've stopped seeking what is true, it's only because it's familiar and known to us we assume it's true. And therefore what happens, and this is what's so powerful, it helped me understand this, therefore all we do is seek experience and opinions that confirm what we already know, because we have an illusion that there's safety in that. The other thing that's powerful about his definition, and I find helpful, is then when we only mistake what is familiar as true, then we automatically experience anything new, because it's unfamiliar, as false. And so we're in a self-looping system where we only feel safe when we're around what's familiar and known. Well, how do we ever grow? And so this brings me to the second thing, which I talk about in the book in a chapter called The Two Tribes. And, thinking about these things, as you obviously have, I tried to imagine the different rhythms through history after reading enough and seeing enough and talking with enough people. And it led me to think back and imagine, what was it like when the first two people came upon each other in cave times? Before this, they didn't think there was anybody else. Imagine one person comes to the mouth of a cave and they see another go, oh my God, who are you? And imagine that the one in the cave looks at his other, points and says, you're different, go away. And I think that was the beginning of the go away tribe, which was based on fear and based on only knowing what is familiar is true. And throughout history, when that has gotten severe enough, then the people who are a part of the go away tribe say, I can't trust you'll go away. I'm going to need to put you where I can watch you. So I'm going to put you in a camp, in a detention center, in a refugee camp, in a ghetto. And in the terrible malignancy of fear, when that governs our lives so completely, then we've had these horrible periods of genocide where the go-away tribe says, I can't trust you even be where I put you. I'm going to have to make you go away. But on the other side, let's imagine that person at the mouth of the cave sees someone different for the first time, and they go, oh, you're different, come teach me. And I think that was the beginning of the come teach me tribe, where we say, oh my God, thank God you're not me. Tell me what I don't know, and together we will be more together than alone. And, Plato was part of that ilk when he said that we're born whole, W-H-L-L-E, but we need each other to be complete. And there's in the Chinese mythology, there's a mythical bird called a Qian, C-H-I-E-N. And the Qian has one wing and one eye, and its sole destiny is to find another Qian so that together they can see and fly. And the catch, Kathryn, is that we belong to both tribes. And even though I'm talking to you from the Come Teach Me tribe, I could experience something painful or traumatic, and tomorrow I can wake up and switch tribes. And then I'll need you to remind me that we're a part of the Come Teach Me tribe. And I think that in our age right now, we're, as in other times in history, on a precipice. Which way is it going to go? And if we're going to go into a dark age, I think of the dark ages in Europe, and during those 200-300 years, 10% of the population was literate. 10% kept literacy alive for civilization for 200 years. And as we're entering these difficult times, and I'm not sure that they're dark, but as we're entering these difficulties, it's incumbent on all of us to keep the literacy of the heart alive and to be engaged in these small acts of courage by which we can be the one healthy soul that helps humanity be healthy one more day.
Well, that's wonderful, because it really does put it into perspective in terms of what a person can do. Because what I see, and in conversations that I have with other of my colleagues and friends, and they look out at the world and they just feel hopeless and about the whole thing and don't know quite what to do. Because what do you do when, a community rises up with tiki torches or whatever and tries to impart shame or harm or their will upon another community? There's sometimes in the moment when you don't know what to do, or if you rise up to do something, you could, in fact, be harmed. So
it's very difficult, and I'm just trying to figure it out myself as well. But I know two things that I've been feeling. One is that, I hold circles everywhere I go, and I feel committed to welcome everyone into the circle except those intent on destroying the circle. That's the first thing. And the second is a small poem of mine that goes, the mystery is that whoever shows up when we dare to give has exactly what we need hidden in their trouble.
That's a lovely poem. Thank you. And I'd like to travel down this track for a little bit more, because we are living in a world in which people are, if they're not angry and violent, they're hopeless and suicidal. And even though we want to have this nurturing sense in our being and in our personal relationships and how we engage, how do we translate this into a larger scope so that we don't have people addicted to either prescription drugs or illegal drugs, so that we don't have systems that incarcerate people or let people die in their misery? And how do we begin to mesh these things, or should we?
Well, first off, I can share my thoughts. I don't have any answers, but I think it's important to try to make these connections. And I think all the things we've been talking about apply to how do we, it is, there's a lot of alienation and loneliness and trying to run from being here, and also not to judge people, that there are lots of people who legitimately need some kind of medicine to help them face reality, not run from it. And I'm thinking of people with mental illness and biochemical imbalances. And there's many of us that also try to medicate, and this is the whole life of addiction, to run from the harshness. And I think that's exacerbated because we are alone, because we don't reach out, because we don't, one of the things that happened to me in my cancer journey is, if I was humbly reduced to asking for help, there were no requisites. You don't interview ambulance drivers. You take the first one that comes along. And, so I think that one of the historic roles of suffering, and no one wants suffering. I'm not advocating suffering. I'm describing like you would describe gravity, is there. One of the roles of suffering is that it removes the walls between us, and it humbles us to reach for each other. And I think that there's an entire history in terms of, as you talk about incarceration, and there's so many different levels to that conversation. But there is another lineage of restorative justice, which goes back, our most recent examples are from South Africa, and the wonderful, amazing work of Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Tutu and many others in terms of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But there's an ancient story about where Buddha meets a serial killer in his own time, Aguilamala. And of course, there's none of the exposure that we talked about back then. There was no TV, no CNN. But Buddha came across this village where this mass killer was held until he was hung. And he said, I want to meet this man. And they knew that Buddha was a teacher, so they agreed. And they said, you want us to be with you? And they said, no, it'll be fine. And so Buddha met with Aguilamala. And the story is that they stared at each other for a long time in silence. And then Buddha said to the murderer, I have stopped. You have not stopped. And then they looked at each other for a long time, and the murderer said, I'm ready to die for what I've done. And Buddha said to him, there's plenty of time to die. Are you willing to do what is necessary to reclaim your humanity for what you've done? So even thousands of years ago, what an amazing question. What an amazing question. And yes, there is justice, but justice woven with compassion extends to healing. And so this is what I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was about too, is are you willing to reclaim your humanity? Because when we do horrible things, we've lost our humanity. We've become non-human. And we can do that as human beings, but we also have the ability to become human again and to make amends and repair. In the Jewish tradition, there is an ethic known as tikkun olam, which means you are here to repair the world. But since we are the world, we have to repair ourselves. And so, in terms of getting back to your question about these systems of injustice and these punitive systems, I think that, they have to be approached by many people from all aspects, from education, from social work, from and this involves implementing and bit by bit healing our communities so that our response to people isn't punitive but restorative. Mm-hmm. And I would say we can begin that in our own families, in our own relationships.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense to me. And I would like to go on and on with this conversation, but I wanted to take a moment.
And I feel that my job, as I hold circles and learning circles as I move around the country and abroad, my job is to open up a space in which where I can help people, introduce people to their own gifts and their own wisdom. And so, what happens often is that who is the teacher moves around the room, once like that elder circle, that elder council. And, so thanks for asking about that in more detail, but that's kind of the space that we'll be entering.
And it also sounds to me like a space where people can really heal themselves, find the opening to go deeper in a place that would be safe for them to do that, and really maybe discover some things that they don't want to be there within themselves or that they want to transform. And so could you speak to how this kind of an experience can be a real healing for an individual?
Well, yes. I mean, the work that I do as a guide, as a teacher, is all about what you've just alluded to and pointed to, is that, it's a place and a time to be authentic and through invitation, look at the patterns of your own life and your own journey and your patterns of relationship to source to yourself, to others, to the larger world, and how to leave with not only an accurate understanding of your own place in life, but then how to start to create your own personal practice. What skills, what traits, what actions, again, small things with love, can you do? Because I can't tell anyone, I don't do how-to sessions. I can point up the patterns that everyone has always lived with, that I struggle with myself, and then we compare notes on what it is to be alive. And then we add things to our toolbox. And then we, so my job also, as I hold and convene these groups, is to start more things than we can finish, so that what we open on that weekend, or any weekend, will then spill back into the rest of your life. And if it touches you, then it makes sense to spend time with it.
Yes, that makes so much sense. And it does sound like a wonderful way to sort of ease into this way of living, or is really more how I see it, more than like a process. It seems more that you are leading people or showing people, maybe pointing in the direction of what's really your life, who are you really, what fulfills you. Did you come into this life with something that you really are burning to accomplish that you haven't been paying attention to? So many things, I imagine, could come through this, so that people can learn to live with themselves more compassionately. And I believe if they do that, then it becomes much easier to spread that compassion around.
Yes, and there's an inextricable link between inner work and service. And there's a wonderful quote by the great Hindu teacher Ramana Maharshi from the 1800s, and he said to try to save the world before liberating yourself is like carpeting the earth rather than wearing sandals.
Well, it seems like we've carpeted the earth with cement, but that's another conversation, I guess. We want to get beyond that. So beyond the work that you're doing at the Open Center later this month, what things do you do, or how can people connect with what you do? Say where someone is listening to this and is actually incarcerated somewhere, or maybe is in a family situation where they don't feel the freedom to go and do and to explore. How can people reach out to you, connect to you, either internet or phone or email, however you want to share that?
Sure. So there's, I have two websites, marknepo.com and 3intentions, all spelled out one word, .com. And there are all kinds of where I'm speaking and teaching. But there are also lots of resources of all of my books, and many of my books are on audio tape, which I have done myself. There are also, through Sounds True, there are several what are called box sets of teaching sessions and conversations, where very much like we're talking, but then they lead into very much the kind of work that I do in person through audio tapes or live downloads. So there's also an online community guide that goes along with this book that's on my website that's free to download as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's useful. It's tools for people to engage with and to be able to shepherd themselves according to the wisdom that you are offering us. And a lot of this, I understand at this point, does focus on the book More Together Than Alone, discovering the power and spirit of community in our lives and in the world. And so people can look for that book and go to your websites. And I'd like to cover those bases before we get to the very end of the program, because it would be useful, I think, if you, because I can hear and feel that you do speak from that heart-centeredness, awareness, and understanding that you're connecting to people in a real way. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of pull it all together and talk to people about who they are, or what they can do, or how they should regard life, or whatever wisdom you'd like to share in the next few minutes. And we have, I guess, about another 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think that and thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I feel quite honestly, as a long-term cancer survivor, just blessed to be here at all. And so I have, through that, I have learned, which is, again, all the traditions speak to this in their own way. They all have stories about it. But, that when I can recover how rare it is to be here, that gives me new, fresh eyes, a fresh heart, fresh mind, a fresh tongue. And so, with all the things we've been talking about, being human, then I trip taking the garbage out. Then I break a dish while I'm doing the dishes and cut myself. And then I forget how rare it is to be here. And then I'm focused on the surface world of circumstance. And then it's my job, through presence and holding nothing back and leaning into whatever is before me, to recover how rare it is to be here. Because then I make different decisions. Then, for the moment, I am like Adam or Eve, the first person all over again. And there next to me is you. And you are the first person to be here. And so I think that what I would encourage for everyone is pay attention to how do you recover that presence when you lose it. Because we all lose it, because we're human beings. And the part of us that's human is very limited and finite, and the part of us that's being is infinite. And so we're like lightning in a bottle, and we don't know how to get it out. And so I find that, in our times, we have a particular set of circumstances, but really every generation ever has always had to struggle to both survive and thrive. And if all we do is survive, then what's the point? And you can't thrive without paying attention to the world. You and I were having this very deep conversation while walking on the street, and we didn't look. We got hit by a bus. Well, that's surviving. We have to pay attention to what's around us. But nobody quite knows how to both survive and thrive. No one has ever known. And we have to discover our own way. And so I just really encourage people to truly devote ourselves to what it is to be here. There's nothing as messy and as magnificent as being human. And if we were all actors and actresses, and so a famous film director came and talked about, everything we've talked about in this hour, and then offered the part to us of being human, we would think it was the part of a lifetime. And it is. And this is the challenge of what we're here to do. And, medieval monks, when asked how they practiced their faith, they said by falling down and getting up. And I love that. So let me just offer another small poem of mine that speaks to this challenge. It's called Free Fall. If you have 1 hour of air and many hours to go, you must breathe slowly. If you have 1 arm's length and many things to care for, you must give freely. If you have 1 chance to know God and many doubts, you must set your heart on fire. We are blessed. Each day is a chance. We have 2 arms fear wastes air.
Wow. That was certainly a beautiful and inspiring poem. I wasn't sure I was interrupting you, so I wanted to wait a bit.
No, thank you.
I love that. And even though, we have just another few, I wanted to touch on this idea as we're coming to the conclusion on resilience, because there have been times in my life when I couldn't get up again on my own, or I didn't want to. So how do you build in that falling down, getting up, resilience into our way of being?
Well, I think for me, and this has been the key thing, the central thing, and that we are so afraid of our life of feelings when it is through our life of feelings that we animate and access resilience. And so I have found that the courage, and then the courage to, as we said, you don't interview ambulance drivers, so the courage to reach out when we're in need to help us get through our life of feelings. Because when I am thoroughly myself, when I reach the bottom of whatever it is I'm feeling, I trip into the well of all feeling. And now I'm not alone. Now, like a fish riding a current in a river, now I have touched through my thoroughness and authenticity into the life of all feeling and all spirit. And that helps carry me. And I've started to think of that as resilience.
Okay. I like that. It makes sense. It's almost like you said, especially with this metaphor of, just following and allowing where your heart takes you, whatever that might be. And if you keep trusting that, it's going to take you where you need to be, is how I interpret what you're saying. But that's a beautiful thought. I wanted to remind everyone that we are speaking with Mark Nepo, M-A-R-K, N-E-P-O, a poet, storyteller, and internationally renowned spiritual teacher. He's the author of many audio projects and books, and his recent work we've been talking about is More Together Than Alone, Discovering the Power and Spirit of Community in Our Lives and in the World. This is a book. And you can also meet Mark Nepo in person and engage in two events he's having at the New York Open Center on Friday, October 26th, More Together Than Alone, Discovering the Power and Spirit of Community, and Saturday, October 27th, The Power of Community to Heal Pathways That Bring Us Together. So all that you'll find at opencenter.org, and you can reach Mark directly. Again, will you give out your websites, Mark?
Yes, that's marknepo.com, and Three Intentions, spelled out as one word, threeintentions.com.
Excellent. And I just want to let everyone know that you can also go to the website prn.fm of the Progressive Radio Network. You can look up the archive page for Heart of Mind Radio, and you'll be able to listen to this program again. You can download it. You can send it to your friends. And also on the archive page will be the links to Mark's website and the Open Center classes, so you'll be able to make those connections at prn.fm. And for those of you who would like to connect with me directly, my email is heartofmindradio@gmail.com, and the website is heartofmindradio.com, and you can find many ways to reach me through those means. So again, I want to thank you very much for joining me today, Mark. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and thanks for letting me be a part of your good work.
Excellent, and hopefully we'll speak again soon. And I want to say thank you to all who have tuned in. Please tune again on Saturday at 6 p.m. for Heart of Mind Radio over the Progressive Radio Network. Be well, take care, and keep that heart open. Bye for now.